your whole job was to go out and find the enemy and kill them. That was it. I mean, it was plain and simple as that. That's all you did. But it was 24/7.
And you're alone again?
Yeah, you're always alone. You didn't know anybody. You went to war alone, you came home alone. That was the Vietnam War.
Today is October 27th, 2020. My name is Debbie Bussinger, and we are here today at the MAPS Air Museum with Richard Stoltz to discuss his time in the United States Army. Richard, will you say your full name and spell your last name?
Okay, Richard Francis Stoltz, S-T-O-L-T-Z.
And can we start by where you were born?
I was born in a small town called Spangler, Pennsylvania. I was born October 2nd, 1950. One of 4 children.
What did your parents do for a living?
Unfortunately, my mother just passed away 4 weeks ago. She spent over 60 years in retail. She worked all the way up until she was in her 80s. They met in World War II. My father worked at Ford Motor Company at Walton Hills. And in 1939, when the Germans invaded Poland, they took my mother, who was 12 years old at the time, and my grandmother, and they put them on a train and sent them to Czechoslovakia and put them in forced labor. And you can just imagine a 12-year-old little girl making ammunition for the Nazis for almost 4 years. And in 1945, the Russians were hell-bent on getting to Berlin as fast as possible. Well, she woke up one morning and all the guards were gone. They knew the Russians were coming, so they took off. And my mother and my grandmother, they hitched a ride on a Russian tank. And they dropped them off just across the German border in a place called Passau. And my mom and my grandmother both became displaced persons. Today they call them refugee camps. Back then it was called a DP camp, a displaced persons camp. And that's where my dad saw my mom walking down the street one day, and they got married. Would you like to see a picture from
Sure.
World War II?
Yeah, and did they ever find their parents?
Well, what happened was her mother ended up going back to Poland. My mom, she was only 16 at the time. She was afraid to go back because of all the horror stories you heard from the Russians raping the women and treating people terribly. She didn't want anything to do with that, so she eventually married my dad and you know, made the right decision. They were married for 73 years. My dad turned 93 4 days after my mother's death last month. But here's a picture of my parents standing by the Danube River in Germany. And I'll tell you a funny story about what my mom's wearing. My dad bought her those clothes with a carton of cigarettes.
And what are their names?
Francis and Sonia Stoltz. And they ended up coming to the States and started having children.
And how did they get to the States? Was that a
By ship.
program? Well, was
Well,
it a program? Or
No. It was very difficult to marry somebody, even today, a foreigner, if you're in a time of war. There's certain restrictions you have to, or a certain protocol you have to follow. So it took them a while, but they eventually got married. They came to the States on board a ship. I can't remember the name of the ship, but we ended up living in Pennsylvania in a small little town. We still had no indoor plumbing, no electricity. Our lighting was by kerosene lamp. I can still remember my mother going out the back door of the pump and pumping water into a big tub so she can give us kids a bath. And in 1956, my dad got a job at Ford Motor Company. It had just opened. And so he moved the family to Akron, and we've been here ever since.
Okay. Now, where were your parents born?
My mother was born in Poland, and my dad, he was born in Pennsylvania. So.
But they met overseas?
They met in Germany.
In Germany?
My
And
mother,
why was your father there?
my dad was there, I think, 3.5 years. He was a member of what they called the constabulary. After the war, actually the war didn't end until 1946, technically. But he was already there. After the war, there was no infrastructure in Germany. There was no police departments, no firemen, no city hall, no government whatsoever, nothing. So a constabulary force was made, and they were basically acting as military police. And they would patrol the border between Germany and Russia. And at that time, the Russians were still killing Americans by sniper fire. But that's what my dad did in the war.
Okay, because during that war, at some point, Russia and the United States worked together.
Up until the end of the war, then they became enemies. The Cold War, the Iron Curtain, I'm sure you've heard of that. Winston Churchill named it the Iron Curtain, and it stuck. But they were allies up until the end of the war.
Okay, and was your dad in the military?
He was in the Army.
He was in the Army there,
Yes.
and then ended up staying as a military personnel or as a civilian?
Military
Government
personnel.
job? Okay.
Yeah, he was in the military when they got married. And eventually, like I said, they moved to Pennsylvania, and then in 1956 we moved to Akron. And we've been here ever since.
Has your mom ever gone back again? Or
Yes, she has. Twice she went back. By then her mother had already passed away. And you got to understand, back then when Poland was under communist rule, it was impossible to communicate. You couldn't call your relatives in Poland. They couldn't call the States. All your mail was censored. You had to stand in line for hours just to get a loaf of bread. It was horrible, the conditions they lived under. So she finally got to go back, her and my dad. They retraced their steps where they met. They went to Passau, where this picture was taken along the Danube River. But they retraced their steps where they met, where they fell in love. So they were in their probably late 60s, early 70s when they did that.
Had they ever thought about bringing your mom's parents over to the United
Well,
States?
she had no parents. They were gone. She only had 2 sisters and 2 brothers. I'll tell you a story. Their 50th wedding anniversary, we had a big party for them. And we flew my mom's 2 sisters into town. The one sister had not seen my dad since the day they left Germany to come to the States. And he was wearing his Army uniform. Well, what happened was I searched for almost a year to find the identical Army uniform he was wearing the last time she saw him. And about halfway through the party, my dad went in the house and he changed into his Army uniform. And he came out, and my mom's sister, you could just see her face. She was reminiscing. That's what he was wearing the last time I saw him. Needless to say, everybody was crying. So it was quite an event.
Yeah.
It was really something. And I have 2 brothers and a sister. My sister Monica is a retired nurse. My brother Dale is a retired Akron police officer. Myself and my younger brother Kenny, we retired from the post office. I had 35 years of service. He had 40 years of service. So basically, my whole family, my siblings, we were all in some kind of a service industry or whatever you want to call it. We were in the service sector, but we're all retired.
Now, what school did you go to?
I went to North High School.
Well, what about elementary school? Were you
Oh,
in Pennsylvania?
Finley, Jennings, and North. If you're from North Hill, that was pretty much it. Finley, Jennings, and North.
Did you do any activities in high school?
No,
No, sports?
got in
or-
trouble.
Ah, okay.
I'm being honest.
People may know you for that.
Yes, I was not a good student. I really wasn't. And then, the funny thing, I turned 18 in 1968. And I had more in common with some of my teachers than I did the students. They were partiers, so to speak. So I was not a good student. I'd be the first to admit it. I was not.
Did you have a subject that did interest you?
Oh yeah, I was a history buff, history and science. I still am. I can't tell you how many books I've read over the years on history. But no, history was my favorite subject.
So at that time, was there a draft still? You had to register
Yes.
for the draft?
As a matter of fact, I have something I want to show you that's 50, 51, or 52 years old now. This is my original draft card from 1968.
And you were given that, well, first, where do you register? Where did you register?
Akron.
But like, do you go to the post office or do they did it in school?
No, they
or
had a
what was
Sector Service office downtown you had to go.
Okay, so
You could have done it at the post office if you wanted to. You still can to this day.
so on your 18th birthday, you have to go in.
Everybody had to sign up for the draft when you were 18. They still do today. You're required to do so by law.
And were you given that card at that time? Did they
Yes.
mail it to you?
Yeah. Yep, that's an old card. You can see how battered it is. But
And that was your, I guess, ticket to the military?
well, yeah. Well, basically, you know, they had deferments. They had hundreds of deferments. Unfortunately for me, I had no plans after high school. I wasn't, you know, going to college. I was a bad student in high school. Why would I go to college? And so what happened was I got a draft notice. Well, before I got the draft notice, I got a questionnaire of what I was going to do after school and blah, blah, this and that. And I pretty much just left it blank, signed it, and sent it back where I'm not going to do anything. So while I'm still in high school, I got a draft notice. I was supposed to graduate in June of 1969. And I was supposed to leave for my military service in July. Well, I found out several of my friends were leaving in June. I thought, well, I'd rather go with them than go by myself. So I didn't know what to do, so I called the draft board, and they told me I could volunteer my draft. And it's still only a 2-year commitment. It's not a 3-year. I thought, well, I want to leave with my buddies, so that's what I did. And on June 12th, 1969, I left for the service.
And who were you? Can you share your buddies' names with us? Or?
Yeah, it was Mike Carmody, Matt Zink, Larry Bate, Larry Rollison.
Did you end up staying with them through?
I did through basic training, and a few of them I did go through advanced infantry training with, but they were scattered after basic training pretty much.
So what was it like when you left for basic?
Well, I remember the day like it was yesterday. It was June 12th, 1969. My parents drove me down to the Greyhound bus station, which was across from St. Bernard's Church in downtown Akron on Broadway. And I remember the Salvation Army band was there. And they gave us each a little packet of toiletries and a small little Bible to take with us. And we boarded the bus, said goodbye to our parents. And what happened is kind of funny. When I got to Cleveland, the Federal Building, you had to go through your physical, and you know, you're just signing your life away, it seemed like. Well, I got called into this doctor's office, and he goes, well, Mr. Stoltz, you know, you only weigh like 98 pounds. You're just a little bit too underweight to go in the military. And he says, we're going to give you a ticket, take the bus back down to Akron. And I was kind of disappointed in a way, I'll be honest, because I wanted to leave with my buddies. But then again, I was kind of happy in a way. So I'm sitting there waiting, you know, for a bus. And I'd say about 40 minutes later, I heard my name called out. And I turned around, and there was a guy dressed up in a Navy uniform. I know nothing about the military, so I couldn't tell you what he was or nothing. But he said, a doctor would like to talk to you. And here was a Navy doctor. He goes, Mr. Stoltz, he says, you're a little bit underweight, but other than that, you're in perfect health. You're leaving tonight. So that's how I ended up leaving that night. First time I ever flew in my life. First time any of us ever flew at night. Or flew in a plane, let alone at night. And they flew us down to Nashville, Tennessee. And they put us on a bus to Fort Campbell, Kentucky for my basic training. And I still have my yearbook. And I have a group picture here. Let's see.
I love these yearbooks.
That's me right there. And that's my picture right there.
Very cool.
And believe it or not, basic training was pretty easy for me because of my size. The physical part. I had absolutely no problems with the physical part of basic training. The hardest time I had was carrying around an M14. If you ever picked up an M14, they're pretty heavy. And it seems kind of odd at that time in 1969 they would train you with an M14 and not an M16. I didn't see an M16 until I was sent to Fort Polk, Louisiana. And also being the size I was, I got to eat all I wanted. Before you were allowed to go into the chow hall, or mess hall they called it back then, you had to climb the monkey bars. Well, to me, I was like a monkey. I'm going in to eat. Well, we had a lot of guys that were overweight. Some of them couldn't even jump high enough to get to the first bar. And those drill instructors, they just humiliated. I mean, I saw guys cry because they didn't think they were going to be allowed to eat. But the verbal humiliation was just terrible. Of course, they were allowed to eat, but anyway, it was fairly easy for me. It wasn't that hard. And then the day we graduated, there's like 9 buses lined up. Everybody's going to Fort Polk, Louisiana for advanced infantry training. So we took off, we drove through the night, and we finally pulled into Fort Polk, Louisiana, which we called Fort Puke. I mean, it was a horrible place. It was horrible. It was hot, it was humid, it was dirty, it was dusty, it was old. Our barracks were actually old World War I barracks, the 2-story wooden. Each floor had a pot-bellied stove. So during the night, somebody had to be up every hour during the night on fire watch. And they didn't treat us bad like they did in basic training. They treated us like a human being, finally. That training was hard. That's where I first learned how to fire an M16. That's where I first learned how to fire an M60 machine gun, an M79 grenade launcher, an M50 machine gun, Claymore mines. That's why they taught us about Claymore mines and hand grenades and just everything related to the infantry. And we were there for maybe, I think 8 or 9 weeks. I'm not real sure. But before you graduated, you had to go through a 3-day course in a place called Tigerland. Tigerland's famous in the Army, even to this day. And it was hot, it was humid. You had a backpack, probably 70 pounds on your back. You had to march like 10 miles. And you had to learn how to survive for 3 days pretty much on your own. It was tough. It really was tough.
What was in your pack?
Oh, everything, you name it. Sea rations, anything you would wear or carry in Vietnam. Hand grenades, ammunition, Claymore mines, you name it. Anything that you were going to be carrying in Vietnam. And the day we graduated, we had a company formation. Everybody's going to Vietnam. Everybody got orders to go to Vietnam. You're going to go home on a 2-week leave, then you're going to Vietnam. Everybody's name was mentioned but mine. They had no orders for me. So what ended up happening is I ended up staying there for like 2 weeks. And a new bunch of guys came in, rotated in, and I didn't have to do anything. I'm done. I finally got orders to report to Panama. Well, from Fort Polk to Charleston Air Force Base, from Charleston Air Force Base to Panama, I still have my travel voucher if you want to see it.
Well, I can scan it.
Okay. And, I'm 19. I'm from North Hill. How do you get it from Fort Polk to Shreveport to the airport, from there to Charleston, from Charleston? How do you do all that?
So you were alone at this point? Because
you're always alone. Yeah, after base training was pretty much always alone. Almost always exclusively alone. You don't know anything. So finally I got to Charleston Air Force Base late at night. I'm hungry, I'm tired. And they said, well, the mess hall is open 24 hours a day because there's flights coming in and out all day and all night. So I went and got something to eat, and I went down to the terminal. It wasn't a big place by any means. And other guys started coming in, filtering in. There was probably 40 of us maybe. And about 6 o'clock in the morning, they put us on an Air Force jet, a passenger jet. And they flew us to Panama. And I got off the plane in Panama, and as soon as I stood in the door, it just sucked every bit of air out of my lungs. I have never in my life been in a hotter place, or more humid than Panama. And they told you before you left, don't bring anything valuable, don't bring any good clothes, because of the fungus and the sweat, you know, in the heat, it'll just eat your clothes off. And it did. It really did. But it ended up being some of the most intense training I've ever gone through in my life. I had no idea even why I was there. There were 2 forts in Panama that had jungle training. One was Fort Gulick, one was Fort Sherman. The main fort was Fort Davis. That was the home of the Southern Command at the time. Fort Sherman was home to the Southern Command of the 101st Airborne Division. So every day you'd see guys jumping out of planes practicing, every day. But the training itself, it was a lot psychological. And just to give you an example, they call them a puma, we call them a mountain lion, is what we call them. And out in the middle of the jungle, they had this big cage. You had to go in this cage, and on the other side, you didn't know what was there, and they opened the gate, and this mountain lion came at you. Little do we know, it's already been fed and everything, but you know, they just wanted to see how you would react, that kind of a fear, how you would react. Another thing they did is we learned how to make a hammock out of our ponchos. So we would sleep at night, and it rained every night in Panama. What they would do while we were sleeping, right before they got us up, they would put snakes in our boots. So when you put your foot in there, obviously there's something in there, and here comes a snake. Just to see how you would react. They wanted to know how you would react to that kind of a situation. Then they had, one time we had to learn how to storm a beach. And we were put on a landing craft, just like you see in World War II. We're out there in the Caribbean, and it was so rough. People were throwing up everywhere off the side of the boat, and they decided, well, we're going to scuttle this. It's just too rough out here. So they dropped us off at the mouth of the Chagres River. It's the main river in Panama. As a matter of fact, it parallels the canal itself. And they had a tower sitting on this mountain with a rope going from the tower down across the river. On the other side of the river, they had a big knot in this rope. So we had to climb up there, climb up the tower. There was a guy up there, he had a pulley, and he dipped it in a bucket of grease. And he attached it to the rope, and you went like that, put the rope under your arms, and jump out. We slid down that river, down that mountain, across the river, and when you hit that knot, I looked like a helicopter blade when I hit that. I mean, my body was going like that. And they didn't let everybody do it. To be honest with you, if you were a little bit older, they wouldn't let you do it. Well, to get back across the river, we had to learn how to make a life jacket out of our clothes. So we had it all stripped naked, tie off the ends of our pants, shove branches and everything down in there, tie it off at the belt, at the waist, take our shirts off, same thing. Put tree limbs and stuff and twigs in there and tied it off here and there, and it worked. It really worked. We had to float back across the river. Got back across the river, we had to go back up in the tower again. Only this time, when you came down the rope, you had to let loose in the middle of the river and swim across. They taught us how to build underwater bridges. And in order to graduate, you had to, if I remember correctly, they took us out up in the mountains, and we had to find our way back with nothing but a knife. That's all you had. They taught us how to catch monkeys, how to kill monkeys, how to kill a snake, how to dress a snake, and yeah, just everything that you could imagine to survive. And we made it back. How we made it back, I have no idea, but we made it to our destination, we graduated. Then I got to finally come home for 2 weeks.
Now, did you do that as a group?
Well, not as a group. There was like 4-man teams. They did. It was mostly all, to be honest with you, it was mostly all special forces. Fort Sherman and Fort Gulick was what they call a combined command. They had Navy SEALs there going through the training. They had Green Berets going through the training. They had Army Rangers going. We even had the Duke of Edinburgh's Royal Regiment there training with us from England. So, it was almost mandatory for special forces. They had to go through this training before they went to Vietnam. Why I was there, I have no clue. I'm just a little private, what am I doing here? And I still to this day don't know why. And to this very day, I've traveled this country. I've talked to thousands and thousands and thousands of veterans all over the United States. I have never met one yet who went through that jungle training. Never. Which is really unusual.
So you worked as a team then?
Right.
So did you each take on certain roles? Or
Well,
did you all?
pretty much we had somebody in charge, you know, with the compass and you know how to read a map. I was pretty good at reading a map. I was pretty good at situational awareness because I was only 19. You know, you're pretty attuned to what's going on, or especially in a jungle environment, a country you've never even been to before. So we all worked together to meet the objective. And we passed, we graduated, we got our patch, which is a very rare patch.
Were they paper maps? Or what,
Well,
what
they
was,
were
what
they
was
were
the equipment?
they were like they weren't paper.
Like a silk cloth or a...
I can't even think of the word. They had like plastic, you know,
cellophane or
yeah,
something?
because of the heat and humidity, so they wouldn't rot. Because everything rotted down there. Everything would rot. So I finally got to come home. Excuse me. And I spent 2 weeks home. Then I had to leave for Oakland Army Terminal in Oakland, California.
Okay, now back to the people that you graduated training with, they all went straight to Vietnam, and then because you were delayed, you went down to Panama?
I don't know why they sent me to Panama. I have no idea.
But they didn't go to Panama. They didn't
Oh,
go to
no,
other
I'm the
places.
only one. I'm the only one. That's why I don't think I've ever met anybody that spent time in Panama in jungle training. Excuse me. So I got to come home, then it was time for me to leave. Akron Canton Airport, there was only United, Allegheny, and Eastern were the main airlines out of Akron Canton back in 1969. I remember I took an Eastern aircraft, flew to Chicago, from Chicago to San Francisco. Then I reported to the Oakland Army Terminal, and what a mess that place was. It was depressing. It was in the warehouse district of Oakland, along the waterfront. I mean, it was chilly, it was wet, it was damp, and it's nothing but warehouses. Once you went through that gate, you're not going anywhere. That's a starting point for your trip to Vietnam, is there. And then when you came home, if you were lucky enough a year later, you came back to the Oakland Army Terminal. And like I said, once you were inside that gate, you're not going anywhere. Well, they had a big board, probably the size of that right there, every day, who's going to be leaving that night, and blah, blah, this and that. Finally, after a couple of days, I saw my name. And that afternoon, they had a big steak dinner, you know, steak, baked potato, everybody, you know, have one last meal here before you leave. So about 1 o'clock in the morning, they woke us up, and they told us to get packed. And we left about 2 o'clock in the morning for a trip up to Travis Air Force Base, which is north of San Francisco. And we got to the Air Force Base, we drove right up to the tarmac, and there was the biggest airplane I've ever seen in my life sitting there. And I think it was a DC-9 where the tail came down with the stairs. We got on board, and we took off about, I don't know, 2:30, 3 in the morning. We took off. We flew through the night, and finally we landed in Honolulu to refuel and change the crew. But they taxied way far away from the terminal. They didn't want anybody seeing us. They did not want anyone to see us. And I remember like a little Volkswagen bus came up, and there's a pilot, co-pilot, some stewardesses got on board. And they refueled, we took off again, and we flew into the night. And I could feel us descending. Where, I didn't know. Well, here it turned out we landed in Okinawa at Kadena Air Force Base to refuel and change the crew again. And still you're not allowed off the aircraft. Nobody was allowed off. So we took off from Kadena Air Force Base, and we're flying across, I didn't know it at the time, the South China Sea. And I'd say about 3.5, 4 or 5 hours later, you could feel it descending again. And I had a window seat, so I'm looking out down at the ocean. There's nothing to see. And it got lower and lower and lower. All of a sudden, I saw an aircraft carrier. I thought, oh my God, this has got to be it. And off in the distance, you could see the coast of Vietnam. So we flew over the coast, and I'm looking out the window, and I'm stunned. I'm in awe. I can't believe what I'm seeing. As far as your eye could see were bomb craters. As far as your eye could see. I'm scared. Everybody's scared. You know, it's like, wow, what is going on here? So anyway, we finally landed at Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base, which at the time was the busiest airport in the world. And as we're taxiing to the terminal, either side of the window you look out, there were fighter jets everywhere. Everywhere you look, there were F-4 Phantoms, you name the kind of aircraft the Air Force had, it was there. Helicopters everywhere, of every description. We got off the plane, and the first thing that hit me again was the heat and the smell. I could never understand the smell. Vietnam has a smell to it. But anyway, they put us on a bus, and they took us to a place called Camp Alpha. And I remember driving or riding along in this bus, and it all had bars on the windows. And I asked, what do you guys got bars on these windows for? Well, in case somebody tries to throw a hand grenade into the bus, you can't, break the glass and kill people. And we got to Camp Alpha, and it was a 4-day, what they called in-country orientation, where they taught you about the history of the Vietnamese people, all the wars they've been through, Japan and France and blah, blah, this and that. Their religions, there's Catholics, there's Buddhists, there's Cao Dai, there's all kinds of different religions in Vietnam. What they eat, how they live. Then they would bring in a couple of Viet Cong prisoners and show you what the Viet Cong was dressed like. And they would bring in a couple NVA prisoners, which they were in uniform. The North Vietnamese Army, they were hardcore regular soldiers. The Viet Cong, they more or less were a ragtag group of villagers and what have you that, want to kill every American they can. And they also, at that time, they took all our money. If you had any currency, you had to exchange it for MPC. You know what MPC is? You want to see some?
Sure.
I've got it here somewhere. MPC stands for Military Payment Certificate.
And is that used on base? Is that the...
That's your only currency. That's all you're going to get. That's it. Let's see if I can find out what I did with it.
we can just scan it later.
Okay. But I brought some MPC to show you what it looks
Now,
like.
can you use that? Did you?
That's the only currency you
and
had.
It's only on base?
No,
that you can
that's
use?
it. The whole country, no matter where you.
Oh,
That's
the whole country. Oh,
that's
that's a whole.
That's it. That was it. That's all you had. And finally, they had a roster where you're going to be for the next year. I was assigned to Company A, 2nd Battalion, 22nd Infantry, attached to the 25th Infantry Division. And at that day, at that time, they were in a place called the Iron Triangle, which was north of Tay Ninh. That's where they were working. So I had to catch a C-130. First time I was ever in a C-130. From Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base, they flew me to Tay Ninh, which is about, 120 miles north of Saigon. It was the loudest airplane I've ever been in my life. It was miserable. And for seats, they just had these straps hanging down from the fuselage. That's what you sat on. I mean, that's it. These things were made for war, not for comfort. And I remember they didn't lift the gate all the way up. They had it partially open so you can look out in the countryside. And there was a crewman on board. I don't know. This was an Army C-130, not an Air Force. And, he had his guns on, his flak jacket. We had nothing. I didn't have a rifle. I don't have a flak jacket. I don't have a helmet. Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
You don't have a pack? Do you have a backpack?
Nothing. You had nothing. Nothing. So anyway, we went to Tay Ninh, and they put me on a deuce and a half. They're going to drive me up to this village where I could meet up with my company for the very first time and see who I'm going to be with for the next year.
And you're alone again?
Yeah, you're always alone. You didn't know anybody. You went to war alone, you came home alone. That was the Vietnam War. It's not like today, where you train with everybody and you go over as a group. That didn't happen, especially after 1968, after the Tet Offensive. Most of the guys who, prior to that, who went to Vietnam went over by ship. They left out of Long Beach, California, or Tacoma, Seattle, Washington. After 1968, they needed replacements, and that's all I was. I'm not a soldier, I'm not somebody in the Army, I'm a replacement. And they treated you like that. You're expendable. But anyway, as we were going up to meet my company, we went through a little village. Every little village, or every village in Vietnam, they have a little central marketplace where you go buy your fish and your rice and blah, blah, blah. And I see something out of the corner of my eye, and I can't believe what I'm seeing. And this truck driver knew it. He'd probably been in country quite a while by then. He pulls over, and there were 5 human heads sitting on these crates. And I'm thinking, oh, there's got to be mannequins. You know. No, they weren't mannequins. They were real human heads. And I would learn it's not the first time I'm going to see that. The Viet Cong would come in at night, and if you collaborated with the Americans, they took you out and they cut your head off. And they would display their heads in the marketplace to scare everybody to not cooperate with the Americans. That was their psychological, and it works, trust me, it worked. It was the most sickening thing I've ever seen in my life. Anyway, we finally caught up with my company, and here it was a mechanized infantry unit, not a straight leg unit.
Which means what?
Which means you're still in the infantry, but everywhere you go, you ride on top of an APC, an armored personnel carrier. Everywhere you go, you ride on top of an armored personnel carrier. And when you first meet your platoon and your company commander and that, nobody trusts you. Nobody even talks to you because they don't know how you're going to react. They just don't know. It's going to take a while. And another thing too, when you're the new guy, the sea rations, that's all we had was sea rations. That's it. That's all I got a pack here if you want to see them. They're 55 years old. Here, I'll show you real quick. They're right here. That's what we ate 3 days a
You
week.
can show it. Yeah. Oh.
That's what
And
we
it's
ate.
just cans of, that's a spaghetti with beef.
Right.
Chunks.
That
and
was one of the
sauce.
better ones. And the guys that had been in country a little bit longer, they got to eat whatever they wanted. I had the leftovers. You had to eat the nastiest thing that you could imagine.
So they got first pick of the sea
Oh,
rations.
absolutely. They've been there longer, so it just makes sense. But it takes a while to get to know somebody. And they encourage you not to be friendly with people because they might die tonight or today or whatever. But that's how I first met my company. And they were working out of a place called the Iron Triangle, which was an area north of Tay Ninh, along the Cambodian border, not far from it. You had the Bo Loi Woods, you had the Iron Triangle, you had Tay Ninh Province, you had Dao Tiang.
And now what were these? What were those places?
Those were war zones. That's where active combat was taking place.
And would that change, or those were?
Well, it would change from day to day, from hour to hour. And the reason they were so active is they were in close proximity to the Cambodian border. The North Vietnamese would come over and harass and shoot and kill. Then they'd go back across the river. We couldn't go after them. It's a different country. You're not allowed to chase them. You're not allowed to go after them. So that's why it was so active. Plus, it was within 100 miles of Saigon. In that area, too, it was called 3 Corps. Vietnam was broken down into I Corps, which is the north, 2 Corps, which is the Central Highlands, 3 Corps, which is the area around Cambodia and Saigon, and 4 Corps, which was the Mekong Delta. We were in 3 Corps. There was more Agent Orange sprayed over 3 Corps than anywhere else in the country because of its proximity to Saigon. And I think there was like 12 different defoliants they sprayed, but Agent Orange was the worst. And every day, one thing people got to realize about the Vietnam War, as opposed to Korea or World War II, for us it was 24/7. It was nonstop. You went out on search and destroys every single day. At night, you went out on a night ambush patrol. I'll never forget the first time I had to go out on a night ambush patrol was Christmas Eve of 1969. I'd only been in country a couple weeks. I'm the new guy. Well, you got to go out, you got to learn somehow. I was scared to death. I can close my eyes and look back today, and I remember setting up the Claymore mines along this path. It was a beautiful starry night, and I'm thinking to myself, dear God, I don't want to kill somebody tonight. I don't want to die tonight. It's Christmas Eve. Of course, the Viet Cong, that's nothing to them. That holiday means nothing, but that was scary the first time out. And you hear the bugs at night I've never heard before. They had these frogs, I won't tell you what they called them, but they had these like a re-up frog, re-up, and you hear like, wow, what is that? Or a something lizard.
Yeah, you can say what
An FU lizard.
Okay.
An FU lizard, they called them. First time you ever hear something, it scares you're scared to death. Plus, they had poisonous snakes all over that country. They had rats as big as cats all over that country. And the worst of all, believe it or not, were the red ants. You hit a red ant's nest, you're in trouble. I mean big trouble. I remember one time we hit a big red ant's nest. There's like 6 of us on top of this APC. And as fast as you can blink your eye, there's 6 naked guys there. And they got red welts all over their bodies, like they had a bad case of measles. Those things were horrible, absolutely horrible. So there's a lot of other things besides the Viet Cong and the NVA you had to watch out for. There was the environment itself. And in the monsoon season, it just rained, and you're out there, you got to put up with it.
So your role in the infantry,
Mm-hmm.
is that right, was to just kind of search and destroy? I mean, as far as what your role or your job title?
Right, I was called an 11 Bravo in the Army, which means light weapons infantry. And your whole job was to go out and find an enemy and kill them. That was it. I mean, it was plain and simple as that. That's all you did. But it was 24/7.
Yeah. And you went out as a unit of certain amount of people? Like they would send you out on...
Well, it depends. It depends. Like if they had some Viet Cong activity, they might send a couple APCs out to check it out. Not everybody. And if something did happen where they contacted the enemy, we loaded up and we went there. So it's just hard to explain. You were out every day looking for the enemy. Every day and every night. It was non-stop. I'll give you a good example. You're familiar with the Bob Hope shows, right? Somebody who served in the military, what I see on TV is different from what you see. All those Bob Hope shows were what they call rear echelon MFers, is what we call them. Combat troops weren't allowed. You were not allowed to go to a Bob Hope show. Unless you were stationed in that rear area, fine, you can go to the Bob Hope show. I mean, we were treated pretty bad, actually, when I look back on it. And I would say every 90 days, we would go back to a base camp for what we call a stand down. Where you had to turn in all your weapons and everything, and it was a cordoned off area. Nobody on the base camp was allowed in there but you. Where you could take a hot shower, eat some decent food for once, maybe write some letters home. 3 days later, you collected all your weapons, and you're gone. Back out on search and destroy missions. It's nonstop. It was really nonstop. And I could tell you some weird stories about how weird that war was. I got arrested one time in Vietnam for carrying a concealed weapon. I tell this story, people look at me like you're crazy. I said, no, I'm telling you the truth. This is what happened. an MP come in the early room one day. I had to go back for some booster shots, so I couldn't go back out with my unit for a couple of days. He goes, hey, can you spare a couple guys to take a prisoner down to Long Binh Jail? Long Binh Jail is a maximum security facility. It's for all services and all civilians who committed a felony over there. And there were felonies committed over there. So I said, sure, I'll go, just no problem. It's only like 60 miles from here. So
Yeah, keep going.
we went to the MPs and they gave us each, there was two of us, they gave us each a .38 caliber pistol, you know, in case this guy tries to escape or in case something happens. So we were on Highway 1 headed to Long Binh, and little did I know that outside the outskirts of Saigon was the largest refugee camp you could ever imagine. On both sides of the road, as far as your eye could see, were refugees. So that held us up. Finally, we dropped this prisoner off at Long Binh Jail, and it was getting dark. You don't go anywhere in a motorized vehicle in Vietnam at night. The night belonged to the Viet Cong, period. That's their thing. So I thought, well, you know, let's see if we can get a room or something somewhere with Mama San and get some cold beer and stuff and spend the night here, and then we'll head back the next morning. Well, next thing I know, I see this blue light. I could tell it was either an MP or somebody else. Here it was an AP, a couple APs, air policemen from Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base. They asked me what I'm doing there. I said, well, I'm trying to get a room, get some beer and stuff. You know, we just dropped a prisoner off. And he goes, well, you know, this is off limits. I've never even heard the word off limits. So what do you mean off limits? What the hell is that supposed to mean? You know, I was getting mad. So he did the old cop thing, put us against the damn Jeep and frisked us, and we each had a .38 in our pocket. So they arrested me for having a loaded pistol within the city limits of Saigon. So they took us, handcuffed us, took us to the Air Force Base, to Tan Son Nhut, put us in it was a Quonset hut, like a holding cell. And I am so mad I'm livid, because next morning I got to go back out in the field. You guys, you got drive-in movies here, you've got NCO clubs, officers clubs, you got air-conditioned barracks. I don't have any of that. So what happened was this captain came out, an Air Force captain, wanted to know what was going on, because I'm screaming bloody murder. So what he did eventually, he let us out, and he made these two MPs drive us down to a barracks, so we got to spend the night there. And the next morning I went back to Cu Chi, and that afternoon I had to fly back out on the supply chopper back out to my unit. But I couldn't believe I got arrested for carrying a concealed weapon. I mean, that's how stupid that war was.
You got arrested for taking a prisoner.
For carrying a concealed weapon.
Well, I mean,
yeah,
but you
right,
were
but
taking a prisoner.
I was doing the MPs a
jail.
favor because they were short-handed, you know, and I thought it was just going to be like a 3-hour ride down and a 3-hour ride back, but I didn't realize Highway 1 was so congested. I'd never been on it before, and I never realized there were so many refugees. I've never seen anything like that in my life. Both sides of the road, just as far as your eye could see, were refugees. It was unbelievable. It really was. It was unbelievable. And then I had been wounded once already by then by a booby trap.
And how did that happen? Can you share that?
Well, actually, we were going through a hedgerow, and there was a little stream. And the guy in front of me jumped over it, and he stepped on a mackerel can. Anybody that was in the infantry in Vietnam knows what a mackerel can is. If you don't, then you weren't there. There were a million of them. They were just little cans with packed mackerel, because the Vietnamese, they liked to eat fish. And they would fill them with nails and glass and rocks. It's not meant to kill you. It's meant to maim you and scare the hell out of you.
Okay, so it looks like a fish can?
It is a fish can.
But does it have an explosive in it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It usually had a pressure device. You stepped on it.
Okay.
And he stepped on it, and the shrapnel came back on me and a friend of mine by the name of Brett Jones. And it looked worse than it actually was. I had little pieces of glass and nails and rocks in my face and my arms, my legs. But we had so many of them, they had to medevac us out to the hospital to get cleaned up. We were only gone 2 days.
And where was this at?
That was in Tay Ninh province. It was north of Saigon.
And were you on
We were on a search and destroy mission, right. And the ironic thing about it was, I talked to my friend that got wounded 40 years after. And we were talking about that day. He goes, you know, the dumb thing about it was, there was a sign on that tree. I said, I know there was, but you and I couldn't read Vietnamese. It was a warning sign to the civilians that there's mackerel cans here, don't come through here. You know, you can't read Vietnamese, so I didn't know. And another, a lot of guys, not a lot, there were a few men over there, harmed themselves to get out of combat. I saw a guy do something once that just, to this day, I can't believe he did, but he did. And I watched the whole thing unfold. He was a big guy, he was from Georgia, I remember that. He was always scared. Everybody was scared. One day we were sitting on this ridge top waiting for orders to go through this hedgerow down below, and he's got a hand grenade in his hand. Can I demonstrate what I'm talking about? It's all non-lethal, it's all been taken care of. I mean, nothing's gonna hurt you, but I'll show you what he did. And I'm sitting there, you know, I'm just watching, looking out in the distance, and got this hand grenade in his hand. He's going like,
Oh, yeah, don't pull it here.
no, I'm not.
Oh, okay, hollow.
It's hollow. I'm not going to pull it. I just want to demonstrate what he did. I'm sitting there, I'm watching this guy. He puts the hand grenade down like that. He's holding a firing device in his hand. Pulls the pin. Well, actually, this is a firing device. He pulls the pin. We call this a spoon. I saw the spoon went flying. It's just like, what? And 4 seconds later, he blew his fingers off. Blew all of his fingers off, just so he can go home. It's amazing what fear can do to a person.
Yeah. And you probably didn't, that just seemed unreal.
It was unreal. And, you know, everybody's yelling for the medic, and the captain came. I said, that idiot, he blew his fingers off on purpose. I watched the whole thing, you know. There were guys that shot themselves in the foot to get out of combat. I mean, it's just amazing what fear can do to a person. But
so when you were taken, so you were in the field, and then were you trucked back to the hospital, or where did you?
No, a medevac helicopter. You never trucked when you're wounded, never.
Okay.
Takes too long. You had a 12th Evac hospital in Tay Ninh, and you also had one in Cu Chi. And if you were really severely injured, they flew you to Saigon, from Saigon to Japan, for guys that were really severely wounded. So as the year is going on, about sometimes towards the end of March in 1970, we noticed in the distance at night, someplace is getting the hell bombed out of it. You can see, it's called an arc flight. It's a B-52, they fly in formation like that. Oh, you're in the Air Force, you know what I'm talking about. And they let their bombs loose in here. You see this big glow, then another one, then another one, then another one, as far as your eye could see. But you didn't hear anything for 10 minutes. And this went on night after night after night. And I'm thinking, geez, ow, somebody's really getting it bad. Well, what happened was we got called back to Cu Chi, our main base camp. We were told to, you know, ration up, get as many C rations as you can, as many bullets, as many hand grenades, everything, just pile up, you just get everything you need. Next morning, we took off up Highway 1. And, oh, I don't know, we were about 20 miles up Highway 1 going towards Tay Ninh. And there was a curve in the highway. And I looked back, as far as your eye could see. There were tanks, there were APCs, there were tanker trucks, there were water trucks, every kind of vehicle, Jeeps, everywhere. Overhead, every helicopter you can imagine is flying up. Chinooks, Hueys, Loaches, you name it, Cobra gunships. I'm thinking, geez, something bad's going on. So a couple hours later, we ended up at this river. It's called the Cow Bai Back River. and it's the river separating Vietnam from Cambodia. And we got there, the combat engineers were putting a pontoon bridge across the river. We still didn't know what was going on. So later that night, well, not that night, I'd say around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a big Chinook landed, and ABC, NBC, and CBS got off. They were the only networks in America at the time, just 3 major networks. That's when we found out across the bridge is Cambodia. We're invading Cambodia the next morning. That's where the B-52s were dropping all their bombs a week or two prior to us going across. And so I've got pictures here too, if I mean you want to scan them over there, whatever. We crossed the river the next morning. Nothing really happened. It was hot, you know, it was dirty. And every once in a while you'd see a picture of Ho Chi Minh nailed to a tree. It's like, wow, this is weird. And then all of a sudden you started smelling it. And it's a smell you never forget. Yeah, there's a couple dead bodies there. There's a few dead bodies there. There's dead body parts hanging out of trees. And that's what the B-52s did. And they left their dead just to rot in the sun. And they would bloat real bad. It was sickening. It was actually sickening. And we came into a major North Vietnamese camp. They had everything you could imagine there. The tons of rice, ammunition everywhere. We even found a Volkswagen. Had to have been for a North Vietnamese officer. That's all I could think of. And the smell was just unbelievable. The bomb craters, they were so deep. And, excuse me, my father would send me the Sunday Beacon Journal, and I usually get it a week late. And I remember we were in a clearing one time, and the resupply chopper came in, and we saw the orange mailbags fly out. That was the greatest sight in the world to any GI in a war, is seeing the mail. And we're sitting there, and they called my name, threw me my Sunday Beacon, opened the Sunday Beacon, and there on the front page, 4 students killed at Kent State. 9 injured, 9 wounded. Yeah, I'm just like, I can't believe it. My brother's a student on Kent State right now. You know, I didn't know whether he was one of the ones killed or I didn't know. You know, I was scared to death. I didn't know what to think. And all of us sitting there, you got to understand, we were all between 19 and 22 years old. We're all college age. Everybody wanted to read my paper that day, the story about Kent State. And I got to tell you, we were all stunned. We were all shocked. There was none of this, well, they got what they deserved or nothing like that. We were just absolutely stunned that the National Guard was given live ammunition to begin with. We couldn't believe it. But I could tell you and tell your audience whatever, we were all stunned, saddened by it. We just couldn't believe it. What are we doing? What is going on with this world? And they were protesting us there in Cambodia. That's why they were protesting. But anyway, we would get sporadic fire every once in a while. Well, then President Nixon came out and announced that we're only allowed to go in 20 miles, that's it. It was international news. So what did the North Vietnamese do? They went 21.5 miles, sat there and laughed at us, so we can't come any further. But one day, it was May 20th, 1970, we were on a search and destroy again. We were at a place called Ambush Alley. And it's just like an ox path. It wasn't a road, it was an ox path. Just devastation everywhere your eye can see. I mean, it was just unbelievable. It was hot, very hot. And all of a sudden, a guy stood up in front of the track in front of mine. He had an RPG. He let loose. And you could actually see the rocket coming at you. So the driver of my APC, he went like that, and you got to jump off right away. When you jump off, you can't be wearing a helmet or anything like that because it'll break your nose or something. But when I jumped off, I noticed something hit me in my left shoulder, and I didn't know it at the time. I landed on a big rock, and I broke my tailbone. And so anyway, I was medevaced out. I had a big hole in my left shoulder. I had a broken tailbone, which was unbelievably painful, and there's nothing they can do for it. Absolutely nothing they can do for it. So I stayed back in the rear for probably a month and a half trying to recuperate, and eventually I went back out in the field again.
How hard is that to know you're going back out?
You know, in a way it's hard, in a way it wasn't, because you made friends. I don't want my friends out there without me. You know, we didn't fight for America. We're fighting for each other to stay alive. That war was stupid. We all knew it was stupid, even though I'm only 19 years old. What in the hell are we doing to these people? Because I lived with the people outside the wire, they call it. You know, I lived with the peasants out there. I saw them every day. I know how they live. I know what they have. A nice house had a mud floor and maybe one other room, and that was it. You know, they're very, very, very poor, but they are also, believe it or not, very intelligent. Especially when it comes to war. They've already fought the Japanese, they fought the French, now the Americans. So they knew what they were doing. They knew how Americans acted. If you were a smoker, you're on a search and destroy, you can't smoke. They can smell it. You can't wear cologne, they can smell it. You can't wear aftershave, they can smell it. They knew our habits. They knew you had to go to the bathroom. You have to go to the bathroom in front of everybody. That's just the way it is. And they knew that. And they would snipe at you when you're at your most vulnerable. You know, I mean, they were very intelligent when it came to that. Their tunnel systems were unbelievable. I went down a couple. That was it. 2 was enough for me. I'm not going back. And it was all voluntary. Nobody was ever ordered to go down a tunnel. Nobody. You had to volunteer to do it.
And was that a search mission?
Yes. Yes.
What we would do. That was like after.
No, I'll tell you what we would do. We provided security for combat engineers every once in a while. They had these huge bulldozers. I mean huge. You had one here, and they had this big chain attached to both of them. And they would just go through the jungle, just dragging that chain. And it would knock over all the vegetation, the trees, and it exposed tunnels. It also exposed a lot of booby traps or landmines. They were called roam plows. Excuse me. And the reason they were called roam plows is the fact that they were made in Rome, Georgia. That's how they got their name. That's where we got most of our Agent Orange exposure too, because you're following the back of these things and all that dirt and dust and grime and grease is in your nose, in your mouth, in your ears. I mean, it was in your clothes. It was everywhere. It was everywhere. Because normally what they would do, they would fly over, drop Agent Orange, they'd wait a week or two, then they would send the roam plows in because most of the vegetation's already dying. So that's how we got exposed to a lot of the Agent Orange over there. And but it was the same old thing, go back out in the field, same old, just 24/7. Until I finally got orders, I'm going home. Finally. It seemed like an eternity. Mm-hmm. And I finally got my orders, flew back to Cu Chi. They trucked us from Cu Chi down to Long Binh, down to Ponce Nude Air Force Base. Then we had to wait on the roster, see if our name was there. I waited like a week. Finally, I saw my name. I finally get to go home. And when that bird left that ground, it was just euphoric. I mean, you couldn't believe it. And we flew from Vietnam to Japan, Yokota Air Force Base. From there, we flew to, I think we flew to Hawaii, from Hawaii back to Oakland, but then again, we landed in Travis Air Force Base at 3 o'clock in the morning. And the reason being is, at that time, the hot spot for anti-war activity was at Berkeley. The government didn't want any of these students to see us leaving for Vietnam, and they certainly didn't want to see us coming home. That's why the wee hours of the morning going and coming. That's why they did that. And we were told, if possible, wear civilian clothes home. You know, you hear stories about veterans saying, well, when I got off the plane, I got spit at, called a baby. That's not true. And the reason it's not true, So when you landed and got off the plane, you were on an Air Force base. And I guarantee nobody in the Air Force is going to spit at you and call you a baby. Now, that might have happened when they got on a commercial airliner, but it didn't happen when you got home. It just didn't, because you were on a military base. They wouldn't treat you like that. But I remember the flight home from San Francisco to Cleveland. Nobody would talk to you. I mean, nobody paid you any attention. Even the guy sitting next to you in the seat, you know, he didn't want nothing to do with you. It was just the attitude you felt.
Because they could tell you were...
Well, I had
in
my
the
uniform
military.
on because I didn't have civilian clothes. And they just didn't want anything to do with you. I mean, they really didn't. It's kind of sad in a way when I look back on it. You know, today you see all these troops coming home. They get big welcome homes here at MAPS or wherever. Or then you can't. You were alone. I went to war alone, came home alone. That's it. That's how it worked. That's just exactly what it was.
How long before your unit started accepting you? You said when you got there you were a replacement.
It took a good month. You know, like I said, I had to go out on my first night ambush patrol. They wanted to see how I would act then. First time under fire, you know, it took a while for them to trust you. But once they did, you became lifelong buddies. I mean, plus, another weird thing about the Vietnam War is people rotated out almost every day. Either someone was killed, either somebody was wounded, would never come back, or your year was up. So it was a constant turnover. There was never a cohesive unit together. Everybody was not together all the time. That's just not what happened. So
did you practice or train when you were there to have a better outcome of your mission? Like when you were there, was it just like, all right, let's get together and go out, or
no,
kind of work and
no, we were given orders. This is where you're going, and if something happened, you had to react to it right then and there. It was all situational. You just had to react. There was no planning in it. And if you've ever talked to anybody that's ever been in a battle in combat, it's loud, it's dirty, it's noisy, people are screaming, bullets are flying by your head, you're shooting at somebody. The chaos is just unbelievable when you're in battle. Just unbelievable.
So the training that you had at Tigerland, that was supposed to simulate that?
It was supposed to, but nothing could ever simulate the live battle. You just can't. You know, at Fort Polk, you know, you're firing blanks. Over here, you're firing live ammunition. There's nothing that can get you ready for something like that. You have to experience it firsthand. But like I said, it's loud, it's noisy. You're calling in artillery. You're calling in airstrikes. It's just complete. Just unbelievable chaos. It's just something you have to experience to understand what I'm talking about.
Did that work well, the logistics and the coordination with the other departments or the
Air Force and the Army or the Navy? And yeah, absolutely perfect.
So that ran
absolutely
well.
Perfect. We always had a forward air observer with us. He's the one that would call in the airstrikes. He's Army, but he's Air Force actually assigned to the Army. And he would be the one to coordinate the airstrikes. So it worked great. Everybody worked hand in hand. I don't care if you're a Marine, Army, Navy, because the Navy had the brown water, which is nothing but infantry floating on boats. You know, that's what they were. They were infantry. Air Force, we all worked great together. We all were fighting for the same flag. It didn't matter what branch of the service you were in. There was animosity, though, between those of us that were out doing combat and those that weren't. I don't know if you're aware of it, but according to the Department of Defense, only 20% of the men who fought in Vietnam were combatants. 80% were support. Not that their job wasn't important, because it was. But that's just the way it was over there. If you were drafted for a 2-year commitment, you're automatically going in the infantry. There's no two ways about it. That's just the way it was back then.
How about the medical preparedness on the front line? The medics and
The medics are the greatest heroes of that war, in my opinion. I mean, they risk their lives every day without any protection whatsoever other than their medical bag. And they were good, and they were good at what they did. The nurses, when you were medevac to a hospital, they would triage you right there on the helicopter pad. I mean, you were stripped naked within probably a matter of a minute, so they could triage you. The nurses, what those nurses and doctors put up with over there, it boggles my mind that they could do something like that. Some of the wounds were so horrific, you couldn't even look at it. And here they are, and they work 12-hour shifts over there, the nurses and doctors. How they did that 12 hours, it boggles my mind. It really does. But the medical personnel, from the medics out in the field to your nurses and doctors, orderlies, whatever, they were great. They knew what they were doing, they're professional. They knew exactly what to do. So.
How about religion? Were there chaplains out there with you?
I'll tell you another funny story about it. I'm a Catholic. Father Roy Peterson was our chaplain. And he had a list of who the Roman Catholics were in our company. So he came up to me one day. He goes, I see you haven't made your confirmation yet. I said, no, I haven't. You know, in the Catholic religion, you make your first Holy Communion, then your confirmation. He goes, well, would you like to be confirmed? I said, well, I'd do anything to get out of the field for a day. I didn't tell him that. So a couple of weeks later, I was told, hey, you got to go back on a resupply chopper. And next morning, I was back in Cu Chi. I had to catch another helicopter flight down to Saigon. I went down there, and there was an old soccer field, I think it was. There was like 9 or 10 guys there already, and there was Father Peterson. He was standing there, and all of a sudden, this little short man come out in his vestments, and here he was, the Archbishop of Saigon. He's the one that performed my confirmation on me. Of course, I had to fly back as soon as it was done, back out in the field again. But we had a chapel. There was actually 9 chaplains that were killed in Vietnam. It was a dangerous job, especially when they go out in the field and perform their services, because they wear their vestments and they stick out like a sore thumb. They're not armed. So there was 9 of them killed in Vietnam. So all from hostile enemy action, every one of them.
Did anybody in the unit, did they find peace or solace in having a
Oh, I'm sure they did. I'm sure they did. Absolutely. And the thing about chaplains, too, if a Methodist minister wasn't available, a Catholic priest would do it. If a Catholic priest is not available, a Protestant minister would do the Catholic rites. They all interchanged. So it was, yeah, very much so.
So when you were out in the field like that, were you dropped off? Did you go out and come back in one day? Or were you out there for 3 days and you slept in the field?
It depended. Sometimes we would go to a fire support base. We would work out of a fire support base for a week. You went out every day. You went out every night if it was your turn. If not, you got to sleep in a fire support base. You still had no mess hall, no showers, no nothing. It was just a small little base with artillery. That's why they call it a fire support base. But there were times.
Have bunks or beds, or what was the sleeping?
No, God, no. Never
slept on the ground.
Never heard of a bunk. We slept in bunkers, rat-infested bunkers. You slept mostly on top of sandbags. That's what you slept on. That was it. There was no comfort whatsoever when you were in the infantry. None. Zero. Absolutely none, unless you came back to the rear. And usually the only time you came back to the rear was to get a booster shot. I remember one time I had to come back to Cu Chi, get a cholera shot. I thought that was going to kill me. I was sick for a whole week after I got my cholera shot. But we never saw that kind of stuff.
So changing clothes and showers was once
There
a week,
was no showers.
Every couple weeks? Or
Yeah,
once
there was no showers unless it rained, or there was a bomb crater with water in it. You can jump in there and swim, but it was still dirty water. I mean, there was no latrines, no bathroom. You had to do what you had to do out, and that's it. There's just, you ate sea rations 3 days a week. That's or 3 times a day is what I meant. But no, there was no comfort whatsoever. So, I mean, just the way it was. There's no changing it. I said, that's just the way it was, you know, plain and simple. Every once in a while, though, if I went to a village and I got tired of eating sea rations, I'd buy a bowl of rice off of Mama San and some fish, just to have something different, you know. But yeah, there was no creature comforts whatsoever, none, zero.
Did you do something for entertainment? Did you entertain each other? I mean,
Well, every once in a while we were at a fire support base, they would send in a band from either the Philippines or Thailand to entertain us out on a fire support base. And in stand down, they always had a band that would play one night. They were either from Thailand or usually they were from the Philippines. They were all young girls dressed real scantily, you know, like back then they called them go-go girls or whatever. But that was about all our entertainment, really. You had Armed Forces radio. Whenever you had a chance to listen to the radio, you always had to have earplugs in. You couldn't have it loud because the Viet Cong would hear it. But, you know, just jokes amongst the guys. You know, we would tease each other. But, no, there was really not that much.
how often did you get mail?
Almost every day, depending. During the monsoon season, it was kind of sketchy because the helicopters couldn't fly. But when they got a break in the weather, you know, you would get your mails probably a week old, 2 weeks old, but you would get it. And you always shared what you got. Like my mom would send cookies and things like that. You shared it with everybody. Even if I only got one cookie out of 10 dozen, that's fine with me as long as everybody got one. But we all shared pretty much. You always look forward to mail call, always.
Were you able ever to make a phone call?
Yes, I did, actually. It was called the MARS, Military something radio system. I called my parents from Cu one time, and it was relayed to Hawaii. From Hawaii, it was relayed to Arizona. And the guy in Arizona contacted my mom and dad. So you would have to say, hey, Dad, how you doing? Over. Then my dad would say, hey, fine, over. Where are you at? Well, I can't tell you, over. You know, just like talking on a radio.
Was there a delay? Was there a
Yeah,
time delay?
a little bit, but that's the only time I ever got the call. So I did call him when I went on R&R.
And where did you go on to R&R?
Australia.
Okay. And what was that from Vietnam?
Yeah.
You
Yeah, I had to fly out of Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base. Matter of fact, I got my boarding pass here. I told you I didn't throw anything away. I really did, from Saigon to Sydney. So
Okay.
I called him when I got to Sydney, talked to him for a little bit.
And how long had you been in country before you could take a
It was quite a while for me. It was almost 8 months, probably. They had already got 2 telegrams that I had been wounded, so they were kind of worried about me to begin with. But Australia was beautiful. I loved it.
Was it a common R&R place?
Yeah, Australia or Bangkok were the two. If you were married, it was always Honolulu. You would meet your wife in Honolulu. But single guys, it was Sydney or it was Bangkok, one or the other. But it was great. And back then, this was 1970, they were still like 15 years behind America as far as technology was concerned. They didn't have color TV or anything like that yet. One thing I found kind of strange is, like, you're used to McDonald's and stuff back in the day, and over there they eat mutton. It's a huge sheep producing nation. So instead of going and get a Big Mac, you went and got a double wimpy burger, they call them. I'll never forget that. It's hard to ask for a wimpy burger. But it was fun. It was a great time. You know, then again, you had to come back to Vietnam. So it just was what it was.
Yeah.
You know, there's no rhyme, no reason to that war.
Now, did you stay in a hotel or did you go to a base?
Oh, no, I stayed in a hotel.
Okay.
No, you were a civilian. Once you left Tan Son Nhut, you became a civilian for a week. So we stayed in a place called King's Cross. It's a hilltop overlooking the bay of Sydney, the harbor. Then they had a big park on the other side. It's called Hyde Park, after the one in England. Well, they're English speaking. Yeah, then they're the Queen. So they were one of our greatest allies.
Now, did you get issued American money? Did you change your
Uh,
other money into?
yeah, you have. No, actually, we changed it into
Australian.
Australian dollars. Is what you did, and you did that at Tom Snoop before you left, so you would have currency on you when you landed. We flew to Darwin, which is in the northern part of Australia, and we left there. It was dark out. I remember that, and I couldn't fathom how big Australia is. From Darwin to Sydney is like flying from LA to New York. And we're flying at night, and the pilot comes on and goes, "You see all the red fires down below? You know, you look out the window and you can see these little flickering." He said, "Those have been burning for hundreds of years in the outback." Yeah, you learn something, you know, that you never would expect to learn. So then we landed in Sydney and spent the week there, and unfortunately had to go back to Vietnam. So it was nice to get away for a week.
And so, what were your injuries? Those 2 injuries are how you got the Purple Heart?
Well, yeah, I got, you can say I got little scars here. I got a scar in my face. I got scars in my legs. That was the first one. And the second one, in Ambush Alley, I got a really big chunk of shrapnel here. I got some shrapnel there, and I broke my tailbone. I've got my medical records from Vietnam here. The real thing. Not,
Yeah.
These are real. I never threw anything away. So,
So, the military communicated to your parents that you were injured.
yes, they
How
sent.
did you get to talk to them later and say I'm
No,
okay?
no, they just sent him a telegram.
Okay.
That's it. That's how they did it.
But that you were not.
Yeah, it's not fatal.
Okay.
You know, I'm not being sent to Japan or Walter Reed or something like that. No, no.
But you were able to send them a letter or something. Saying
Yeah,
you're fine.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And what were the weapons that you were trained on?
An M60 machine gun, M16, M79 grenade launcher, an M14, shotgun, 45 pistol, 38 pistol, and that's about it.
Now, when you were on your search and destroy missions, what did you carry a backpack? Or you
No,
carried a pack?
we didn't have to on a mechanized unit. We didn't have to. All I carried basically was ammunition in my M16, or a lot of times I would carry an M79 grenade launcher. I was really good with that for some reason. I don't know why, but I was really good with that.
So your vehicle carried.
Actually,
Food, or you weren't even out that long.
well, see, in Vietnam, you weren't allowed to ride inside of an armored vehicle. Everybody had to ride on top. If you got hit with an RPG, an armor-piercing round, it would come inside and kill everybody inside. Or if you ran over a landmine, everybody would die from the concussion. So their way of thinking then was, it's better to be on top. If you're hit with an RPG, you can jump off, or if you run over a landmine, it'll blow you off, but it won't kill you. So that's why they did that. Inside an APC was pretty much all ammunition and C rations. That's it. That was it, pretty much. In every APC, you had a 50 caliber machine gun mounted on top. You had 2 M60 machine guns, 1 on each side. So they were pretty well, you know, armored and that stuff. So it was.
Was there any food that you did like over there?
No.
No? Okay. Anything local that you hadn't eaten before that you ate?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there's a fish sauce called Nuc Nam. They sell it here in this country now, but if you ever smelled it, it'd make you want to throw up, to be honest with you. But you put it on rice, it was pretty good. It wasn't too bad. I would eat it today, but that's about it.
Okay.
Over there, it was nothing to see a kid walking down through the village and he'd have 5 or 6 rats by their tail, live rats, and they would always call them number 1 chop chop. I said, no, not for me. No, that's number 10. That's not for me. They ate rats. I mean, they ate a lot of fish. You had the Mekong Delta, you had the South China Sea, you had all these rivers flowing through Vietnam. So they ate a lot of fish in Vietnam.
What was your highest rank?
Spec 4, Specialist 4.
Was there any problem with drugs over there? when you were there?
You know, I never personally experienced anything like that, but I know it happened, but it mostly happened in your rear echelon people. That's where most of the drug abuse. Just common sense would tell you, if you're in the infantry and you're out on a search and destroy mission, you don't want to be high. Because at the blink of an eye, all hell's going to break loose. And believe me, you don't want that to happen. So in my unit, no, I didn't know anybody that smoked pot, or I know it was there. I mean, they try to sell it to you all the time over there.
The locals?
Yeah, but I never experienced it. I'm sure it happened. I'm sure it did happen, out of boredom, basically. If you're assigned to the rear, you're going to be in that place for a whole year. You're not going anywhere. So you're bored, you know. But it was the same thing with World War II. They had a big alcohol problem. This war just happened to be a drug problem. So,
How about the higher echelons? Did your supervisors or unit commanders, were they all pretty good?
oh, my company commander was excellent. Excellent. Captain Leschner was his name. Excellent, excellent. And I always thought he was an old man. Here, we had a reunion. He told me he was only 26 at the time. I said, you got to be kidding me. I thought you were like 50, you know? But no, they were excellent. I only saw a general once out in the field, and he flew in his brand new, shiny Huey, and I remember he gets off the helicopter and he's got a gold belt buckle and the pistols, and if somebody would have shot at him, he probably would have passed out. Probably. So, but as far as my immediate lieutenants, sergeants, and captain, they were excellent. All across the board, excellent.
How about any racial issues? Were there issues?
The only racial issue I encountered actually was when I was at Fort Polk. And we had a weekend pass. There's 3 of us. There was 3 white guys and an African-American guy. There was 4 of us all together. We got a taxi, went into Shreveport. Well, we got her walking around and stuff. We heard the American Legion there was having a dance that night. And if you're active duty, you get in for free. So we went there and you rang the buzzer or someone, you know, opened the door for you. And the guy says, you 3 are allowed in. He's not allowed in here. The African-American guy. I said, well, if he's not allowed in, none of us are coming in. So we all left. And that's the only thing I could remember. I didn't see anything in Vietnam. Most of your African-Americans in my unit, as a matter of fact, I got some pictures of, they sent me some really nice pictures, you know, friends of mine. I didn't see any of that. I really didn't. You're all out looking out for each other. It didn't matter what color your skin was. You want to go home. And I'm sure it happened, like again, in the rear area, where people are bored and they're on drugs. Mm-hmm. But I didn't experience any of that.
Okay. So you came home,
Mm-hmm.
and what happened after you came home?
Couldn't find a job. Well, I still had 6 months to go before I was discharged.
Oh, okay. So where were you stationed there?
Originally, I was supposed to go to Fort Carson, Colorado, but when I'm home on leave, they sent me orders. By telegram, I had to report to Fort Knox, Kentucky. And it just so happened it was one of the coldest winters on history in Kentucky. And here I've been in Panama and Vietnam in a hot jungle environment. They had a barracks set up for returning Vietnam veterans. And it just ironically had to be across the street from the MP station. And they tried to make you get up in company formation in the morning and be military again, and we would nothing to do with any of that. You guys get the hell out of here, leave us alone. And they did, pretty much. They left us alone. And finally, in June of 1971, I was discharged. And that's...
What was your job in Kentucky?
Nothing.
Nothing? Okay, just...
They tried to make you do. They tried to make you do something, you know. Well, I'll tell you what they wanted us to do. Since I was with a mechanized unit, they wanted me to train second lieutenants on tank warfare. Well, I've never been in a tank in my life. You know, what do I know about tank warfare? Plus, it's 9 degrees outside. You know, I'm not going to expose myself to that. And I didn't. And they just more or less left you alone. They just...
You paid your dues.
Yeah, they knew you had enough, and they just more or less just left you alone, you know, so...
Did you come home with anybody that you were serving with, or
No,
you were again?
didn't know anybody. Didn't know anybody the whole way through except for basic training. You went over by yourself, you came home by yourself. You joined your unit by yourself. You know, you went on R&R by yourself. I mean, it's just, you were just always by yourself. You had to grow up quick, real quick, so.
When you were in Kentucky, were you able to come home and visit, or you just...
Yeah, every once in a while I would come home on the weekends. It wasn't that far of a drive, actually, 5-6 hours maybe.
Were your parents very happy when you came back from Vietnam?
Oh, yeah, they were very happy. Yeah, my brother, the one that was at Kent State, he was a big anti-war person on college, and him and I didn't see eye and eye very much, but for the most part, my friends and family treated me great. Everybody else treated like you're a leper. They don't want nothing to do with you. So I couldn't find work. I wanted to go to Akron U or Kent State on the GI Bill. I was told not to. If they ever find out you're a Vietnam veteran, your life could be taken. You know, people were nuts back then. They really were. So what happened with me is I ended up moving to Arizona just to find work. And I worked for American Express for about a year. And I had a brother who was in the Navy at the time. And his wife was expecting their first child. And he supposedly was getting orders to go to Vietnam. And so I ended up quitting my job, going across country to Florida and stay with her in case my brother was going to leave for Vietnam, which he never did. So I had nothing to do, came back to Akron, tried to get a job with the city, tried to get a job with the county, Goodyear, Goodrich, General, Ford, you name it. They didn't want nothing to do with you. And there's a reason why, and I brought a copy to show you what I'm talking about. And so finally my mom goes, hey, I read in the paper the post office is hiring. This was in 1973. So I went down and applied for the post office, and they said, well, you know, I got to take a test, and I did, and I got 10 extra points for being a veteran. Well, I got a couple more extra points for having a Purple Heart, too, also. So finally they called and said, well, you got a job, and I was there 35 years, so no regrets.
Did you suffer any PTSD?
Yes, I did. Serious PTSD. I had a really hard time when I came home.
How did that, did you realize
No.
it was PTSD?
No.
How did you
Numb.
come to
I was
understand?
numb. Numb for years after I came home. Numb. It's the only way I can describe it.
And so others probably saw it in you before you saw it in
Oh,
yourself.
I'm sure. Well, my dad told me even a couple of years ago, and like I said, he just turned 93. He goes, I don't believe you realized what a mess you were when you came home. I said, Dad, I didn't. I really didn't. Drank all the time. I it was just, I was in a fog. I was numb. I didn't know what's wrong. I just couldn't function in society. And I think it had a lot to do with the way I was treated when I came home. Nobody wanted to be around you. Nobody wanted to talk to you. Nobody wanted to hear anything about what you did over there. Nobody wanted to know anything about you. So it was just...
Can you tell me what any triggers might have been?
As far as coming home or in Vietnam?
Well, just well, I guess you just said you were numb, so that was
Right.
kind of an overall thing versus a loud noise or a...
Oh, loud. I'll tell you what, right now to this day, we can walk out in that parking lot, and without looking up, I can tell you what helicopter just flew over. If it was a Huey, if it's a Black Hawk, if it's a Chinook, if it's a medevac helicopter, I don't even have to look. I can tell you just by the sound of the rotors.
So that situational awareness is always on.
It's always on. And another thing that brings back a lot of memories is the smell of diesel fuel. That brings back a lot of memories. a loud noise. I still jump out of my shoes when somebody cracks a loud noise in back of me. I can't be in a confined space. I'll go nuts. There's just a lot of things that just added up and added up. And I did.
Did you get help for that?
Yes,
or?
I did.
Okay.
I wasn't afraid to go get help.
Good, good.
I went to the Center for Stress Recovery at Brecksville. It was state of the art for PTSD at the time. And they diagnosed me within 5 minutes. I mean, they knew something was wrong. So, but no, I did seek help.
Can you share at all what kind of treatments there might be, just for people who are like, I don't know that I want to be forced to do that or go through that, that it's doable?
Well, the thing is, don't be ashamed. You're not alone. Other people before you have gone through this. Seek their help or guidance. You know, back in the day, in my day, I'm 70 years old, you did not go see a psychiatrist or psychologist. You didn't go to the mental health unit, the VA. It was too embarrassing. It was too taboo to admit you have a problem in your mind. But there is help. I mean, there really is. A lot of group help. It helps to sit around and describe some of your problems with other people. So there is help. The VA is excellent when it comes to that, without a doubt. So, and you know, I encourage a lot of your young veterans. I talk to them. I've traveled all over this country. I think I've gone to every funeral route from everyone that was killed in this area from Desert Storm till today. And I talked to him. I had a guy one time, he was in the Marine Corps. I met him. He had a Purple Heart shirt on. Oh, you got wounded? Yeah, you didn't want to talk to me. I said, well, I got wounded too in Vietnam. He goes, you're kidding. I said, no, why would I kid you? I got wounded in Vietnam. So all of a sudden he opened up to me and he just let loose. He started telling me all his problems. He was talking to me about this. And he goes, you know, you're the only person I've been able to talk to since I came home, you know, from the Marine Corps. I said, well, it helps to talk to people. You're not alone, and you're not. Mm-hmm. My experience is different than everybody else that's come in here in front of this camera. Mm-hmm. None of us are the same. So it helps to, you know, to talk it over. It helps to involve your family, too. I admitted to my kids, you know, I didn't know what I've been divorced 42 years now with 2 kids. And I explained to them, I didn't know what my life was like when I married your mother and had you kids. I just didn't know. I just didn't know what to do.
Were you at the post office when you married?
Yes. And she was too. Okay. I just didn't know what to do.
And did your kids know your experience in the military?
No. No, not 2 years later. Many years later. But if finally, I just told them it was all me. You know, I didn't know. I had no direction in life. I didn't know what I was doing. I went through a very traumatic experience for a year. I did things and saw things that no human being should have to do or see. And it affected me in my mind. I didn't know how to deal with it. And I was right up front. I didn't know how to deal with it. So that's how I ended up at the Center for Stress Recovery in Brecksville.
Is that still here?
No. As a matter of fact, Brecksville is gone. They tore it all down. So, but they have a place at Wade Park that replaced it. Okay. So, and it helps me. I go see vets. I've been doing this for years. When Brecksville was there, they had a ward for guys that will never go home again because of their injuries. And it was therapeutic for me to go up and talk to them. If I had to get on my knees to talk to somebody who's about ready to fall out of a wheelchair, that's fine. And I still do the same thing at Wade Park. I go up there. And some of their injuries are just horrific from these wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. It's just horrific. And one thing I learned, though, they always appreciate you coming to talk to them.
Do you see anything different between the wars as far as the outcome of some of the veterans? Well, the veterans today are treated much better than we were. And the reason they're treated much better than we were, we made sure they were treated that way. The Vietnam veterans of America made sure these young people will never be treated the way we were. We won't stand for it.
So they're treated much better than we were. That's a huge difference. And they let you know that too. They'll tell you that right to your face. If it wasn't for someone like you, I wouldn't have what I have today. So, and it's changed drastically. I visited Fort Lewis, Washington, Fort Benning, Georgia, Fort Carson, Colorado. And I was shocked. Totally shocked. I said, well, we're hungry. Let's go to the mess hall. The what hall? Mess hall. Oh, you mean the DFAC unit. So what are you talking about? Well, it's called a dining facility now. They haven't called it a mess hall in 40 years. How come I don't see any barracks anywhere? Oh, those high-rise apartments are all for us. Every soldier has their own one-bedroom apartment. On the top floor is all female veterans have their own one-bedroom apartment. I mean, things have totally changed because it's all voluntary now. There's no more draft, which is fine with me. If you're going to volunteer to protect me, you deserve it. So, one thing I did notice, though, when I went to the dining facility, they had 5 or 6 different stations. They had Southwestern food, they had Mexican food, they had Italian food, they had Middle East food. It's like, you got to be kidding me. When I was in, they just slopped everything on top of a tray, and that was it. You ate, period. So, it's changed drastically. For the better,
Yeah.
for them.
And so you've taken advantage of the VA.
Absolutely.
And are you associated with any other veterans organizations?
I'm a life member of the VFW, the Military Order of the Purple Heart, and the Disabled American Veterans. I'm a life member of all 3, and I support them still. And your younger generation, they don't want anything to do with it. And you know something, I look back when I was young, they didn't want us in there. I really didn't want to go there. So it's no different. That hasn't changed. But there's going to come a day in their life when they're going to want to join something like that. Because they do lobby in Congress quite hard for veterans. So,
Have you ever done that? Have you ever lobbied for?
I've done everything you can think of. I was there in 1983 when they dedicated the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. That same afternoon, I had a long conversation with the girl that designed it, Maya Lin, at Constitution Hall. I've been to Washington for the dedication of the 3 veteran statue. I was there for the nurses statue unveiling. 25 years ago, and I got the picture. Myself, 4 of my friends, and my son, we traveled to Washington, and we were part of the reading of the 58,000 names. It took 2 days to read all of them, but we took part in that. I've talked at length with Sherrod Brown, Tim Ryan, Tom Sawyer when he was congressman, Ralph Regula. He gave me an award one day. I got pictures of that. So yeah, I get my message out. I'm not afraid to get on a telephone and call somebody or write them a letter when I see an injustice to veterans. So I'm really heavily involved with the Ohio Veterans Memorial Park in Clinton. I was involved in raising funds for lobbying for the National Veteran Cemetery in Rittman before it was built. So I've been involved with veterans pretty much for the last 30 years, maybe.
Is there any organization or group that you can suggest to people who might be looking to help in some way, either veterans or families of veterans, or just, it's like, especially with Veterans Day coming up, you know, it'd be good to have that message go out somewhere.
As far as helping?
Yeah, supporting.
I suggest, well, one thing to support would be the Ohio Veterans Memorial Park, because they honor all veterans who served in every war since Vietnam from Ohio. It's a not-for-profit. It's totally donations. It's a beautiful place. The Maps Museum, donate here. This is a hidden gem in this area. You'd be surprised how many people don't even know it's here. Let's see, who else? I think that's pretty much it for me. I like to keep it local.
Right.
I don't like giving out to national organizations and that. They get enough money.
So where is the Ohio Veterans Memorial
In
Park?
Clinton.
It's in Cleveland.
Ohio. Yes. You never been there?
I don't know. I don't think so.
If you've never been there, you would know if you're there. You have got to go see that park. As a matter of fact, on Veterans Day, I think from 6 to 7, they're going to have a candlelight vigil out there. Or anytime you want, it's open 24 hours a day. It's it's all lit up at night. It's beautiful. Yeah, it's the most beautiful veterans park in the United States, in my opinion. And I've been to a lot of them. So, it's the largest freestanding granite wall in the United States. A lot of people don't realize that. They've got a Cobra gunship. They've got a tank from the Iraq War. They've got a Deuce and a Half from the Vietnam War. They have a building, the Home of Heroes. They've got 38,000 dog tags hanging from the ceiling. It's every veteran from World War I to present that have given their life for this country. It's between Barberton and Canal Fulton on Massillon Road. You can't miss it when you go there, but you should go visit.
Yeah.
You're a veteran.
Yeah.
You're a veteran.
There are many things that we don't know, just like maps here. There are many things that you don't know are there until you talk to someone.
Right.
Do you celebrate Veterans Day?
Yes.
Okay.
This year is going to be different because of COVID-19. I celebrate every Memorial Day. I've been involved in the Cuyahoga Falls Memorial Day Parade for 25 years. I've been this featured speaker there 3 different times. I've been the featured speaker at the Ohio Veterans Memorial Park when we dedicated the Purple Heart Memorial. I'm not afraid to get up and talk. The way I look at it, everybody I'm talking to are veterans. They're all my buddies, my brothers and sisters. So
what does Veterans Day mean to you?
It's a day to honor our sacrifice for this country. What this country is going through today, people don't realize that freedom is not free. Somebody, somewhere is paying a price for my sitting here right now. I paid that price years ago, and I'm still reaping the benefits of that, and I will to the day I die. So that's what Veterans Day means to me. Yeah, I'm proud of my heritage. I'm proud of my father served in the Army, my brother in the Navy, my brother that was a policeman. All your firemen, your first responders, especially what's going on in the world today. In my eyes, they're all veterans. It doesn't matter, like I told you earlier, what branch of service you served in, what your rank was. Do you know the reason why there is no rank on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in Washington?
No.
No veteran is more important than another. You could have a private next to a general, and you'll never know that. No veteran is more important than another one. That's why there's no rank.
I like that.
Yes, there's no rank at the Ohio Veterans Memorial Wall in Clinton either. It's all names. It doesn't matter what rank you were. It doesn't matter what branch you served in. You gave your life for this country. So that's what Veterans Day means for me, and I'm proud to be a veteran. There were times when I wasn't. I didn't admit I was a Vietnam veteran probably for 15 years. I was too embarrassed, too ashamed, just because of the way I was treated. So.
Gosh, yeah, that has to add to PTSD.
Oh, I'm sure it did. I'll tell you the truth. I don't think I even admitted. I mean, I had to admit I was a veteran to get in the post office. Once I got in there, it probably took me 15 years to tell anybody I was a Vietnam veteran. A good 15 years. I just didn't want to put up with it. The stares and the snide remarks, and just didn't want to do it. So I just never discussed it.
Is there anything else that you can think of that?
Well, today's veterans, one thing I can suggest to today's veterans, do what I did 51 years ago. Make a copy of everything. Someday, 35, 40 years from today, someone's going to ask you for that piece of paper, and you're not going to be able to provide it. So it doesn't matter what it is. If it pertains to your military service, make a copy, keep your own private personnel file, because someday you're going to need it, and that's going to happen. So,
how about sharing your fears or your experiences with your family so they understand? Are you able to do that? Does that help them, your family, or not?
Well, I think my mom and dad, my dad being in the military, my mother being held prisoner by the Nazis, I think it kind of balances out. They know what I went through. They know. So I really didn't discuss it that. My mother always used to call me her hero up until she passed away 4 weeks ago. So they knew. My brother Dale, who was never in the military, but he was a policeman, he kind of just doesn't want to hear anything. So I don't know. He's still my brother. He's still a cop. I mean, he was a cop. I mean, he put his life in danger every day he put on his uniform. But I can't explain that to him. He just doesn't, it doesn't register with him. So, yeah, it's just the way it is.
Yeah, I know some people I've spoken to who gone to their parents' or grandparents' funerals, and their children, it's the first time they find out that their grandfather was in the military.
Yes, I know that happens
Why
quite.
didn't
That
you
yeah,
tell me?
that happens a lot more often than people realize. But now, like I said, my dad was in World War II. My mom was held prisoner. I mean, they knew what war was like.
How about your children? They probably wouldn't have understood.
Well, no, my son was in the Air Force Reserves for 5 years. Excuse me, my other son, he never was in the military. But they wouldn't understand. Nobody understand. You had, like I said, you had to go through it to understand exactly what I'm talking about. War is hell. I don't care what war it is. I mean, from the Revolutionary War to today, war is nothing but pure hell. Humans killing each other in the most grotesque way possible. That's all war is, and it gets you nothing. In the end, it gets you nothing, really. I had never had anything against the Vietnamese people themselves. I never really had any animosity towards the Viet Cong or the MVA because I knew even at 19 years old, hey, I'm invading their country. They're not here in Ohio. I'm in their country. How they want to live, I don't care. And the peasants, they didn't care. They just want to live, period. They want to see their kids grow up without losing their legs or being shot, terribly burned by napalm. Seeing somebody that was burned, it's the most gross thing you'd ever want to see. But just there is no good in war, period. There is none, zero. So, I hate war.
Yeah, I think we need a different department. We need a Department of Peace.
Absolutely. That would work.
Yeah.
But that's never going to happen, unfortunately. Never.
Not as much money in that.
But yeah, there's no money in that. So, there's nothing glorifying about a war. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. If you ever lived through one, you know what I'm talking about. There's nothing. It's just ridiculous. It really is. Just like what's going on today in Iraq and Afghanistan. How can you change someone's mind that has a mindset for the last 3,000 years? Well, you can't. You got to stop living like that. You have to live like an American now. It's not going to happen. It'll never happen. It just won't happen. You just can't change that.
And who says it's better or right or?
There is no right about it. I mean, we live the way we live because we live in America. We live in a democracy. We have our freedoms. They've never experienced that. All they've experienced is fighting each other because of their religion for the last 3,000 years. And you're not going to change that. It's too embedded in those people. You're not going to change it, period. It's not going to happen. You can have the biggest army in the world, it's not going to happen.
Especially from the outside.
Exactly. It's just not going to happen. If it does happen, it has to happen from the inside. But, oh well, that's craziness, absolute craziness, in my opinion. So.
Okay. You think of, did you have beer? That was one of the questions. Was there beer in Vietnam?
Absolutely, and it was nasty.
That's what I heard.
It was nasty. What it was surplus beer from the Korean War. And it would come in pallets. It was Ham's beer, Schlitz, beer nobody in this country would drink anymore. But if you look at the bottom of the pallet, the cans on the bottom, they all have rust on them and that. So it was bad beer. It really was. And even the peasants, they would come out, they would always have a little bag full of ice and beer and Coke, and they'd sell you Coke for $1 or whatever. And it was nice to have, don't get me wrong, because our canteens, they were made out of plastic. And
Plastic?
Oh, it had to be plastic. Anything steel would make too much noise. You had to be as silent as you possibly could out in the field, period. Everything was made out of some kind of plastic. And but you always enjoy a cold Coke every once in a while. You buy it off Mama San. I'll tell you another kind of.
So Coke was distributing within.
Oh yeah, well they're all over the world. Oh, absolutely.
During war in
Yeah.
Vietnam, they had distribution.
Sure,
set up.
absolutely, absolutely. Anything you had in the United States, you can get over there. If I wanted to, I could order a brand new Cadillac, 1970 Cadillac, and it'd be delivered over there. The black market was so big over there, it was unbelievable. But I'll tell you another humorous aspect of that war. Camp followers, they were called back in the Civil War. Basically, they were prostitutes. Mm-hmm. Well, you'd be out there in the middle of a rice paddy dike, bullets flying over your head and everything. You look over, and there's Mama San sticking her head up over the other rice paddy dike. She'd have her girls with her. They would follow you. They followed us everywhere. It was insane. It was absolutely insane.
And they just needed to live day to day. I mean, that was what they were doing so they could survive.
Yeah, you had we call her Mama San, but she was actually the madam, and the girls were called Baby Sans, and they was like, hey GI, she number 1. Hey GI, she number 2. I said, geez, Al, it's crazy. We just got done fighting, a battle here, and it's just insane. It was insane. That's war. It happened in every war.
Yeah. Did they have another group for the Viet Cong or for the?
That I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know. And you got to understand too, most of the Viet Cong and the NVA that I ran into and experienced, they were all young. They were younger than me probably. They were probably 15, 16, 17 years old. The Tet Offensive of 1968, they lost enormous amounts of men. Enormous. Because they had battles all over the whole country. And the Viet Cong, they lost, I'd say, probably 85% of their fighting force. So.
And what were their weapons?
They had SKS, they had an AK-47, they had a Chinese Chi-Com. Most of them had AK-47s or SKSs. Some of them had stolen American M16s. Anything they could get their hands on, basically.
And as far as supplies, they probably didn't have sea rations and stuff like they.
Well,
lived
they
off the
did.
ground,
I'll tell you what, they did, but they're not like what you think. They were like little tin cans, like that, like a sardine can, and they would have some rice and some fish in it. That was their sea rations, 'cause that's all they ate. But yeah, they had them. Sure, they did.
So how were the Viet Cong supplied? Do you know?
Well, they were supplied across the Ho Chi Minh Trail, from the Ho Chi Minh Trail across the river into South Vietnam.
By Vietnam?
Well, either by the NVA or by Viet Cong guerrillas. One or the other. Didn't matter. They're one and the same. Only one had a uniform on. One was better trained. One was better equipped. So it didn't matter. All your supplies from North Vietnam came down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. All of them. We bombed and bombed and bombed and bombed and bombed and bombed that trail for years and years and years, and it never stopped them. Never. They had a reason to fight. They really did. We didn't. So it was just a strange, strange war. I mean, have you ever heard of anybody getting arrested for carrying a gun in a war zone? That's just how bizarre that thing was, just craziness. When I look back on it, it was real craziness, so.
And have you kept in touch with any of your?
Yes, I have. One of my best friends over there, his name was Brett Jones. I've got pictures. I contacted him 30 years later because I couldn't find him. Last I knew, he lived in Missoula, Montana. I didn't know he got married, moved to Oregon. I had to track him down. It took me a long time. Finally, I got a hold of his son, actually. And I asked his son, I said, was your dad in Vietnam? Yes. Was he with the 25th? Yes. Was he over there at this? Yes. But he's not home right now. So, about 2 hours later, my phone rang. And it was Brett Jones, my buddy. As soon as I heard his voice, it was like we were still best friends after all these years of not seeing each other. He still knew all about my mom and dad, my brothers and sisters. It just amazed me that he knew all that. But we keep in touch, and there was a girl, her name was Kathy Muth from Coos Bay, Oregon. I was with her brother in Vietnam. And we got to be pretty good friends, and I could tell he was real close to his sister. He goes, if anything ever happens to me, you get a hold of my sister. I said, all right. Well, unfortunately, him and 2 other guys stepped on a booby-trapped 155 artillery shell, which is about this big. And it disintegrated them. We went out to recover. It just disintegrated them. And years later, I just started thinking, I promised him I'd do this. I'd have to get a hold of his sister. So I got on the internet. It's 20 years ago. And I finally could track her down to a place called Battle Mountain, Nevada. Then I lost track. So years later, I'm on the internet again, and somebody wrote me and said, hey, I think I know who this girl is you're looking for, but I don't know her personally. I know her sister. I said, here's her sister's email address. So I typed her, and not too long afterwards, I get a reply back that she thought I was some kind of nut. She did. She thought I was crazy. What are you doing? Trying to, talk about my brother and this and that. And so I wrote her back, and I told her exactly who I was. I was with your brother in Vietnam. I was with him the day he died. I helped recover his body. I need to talk to your sister, Kathy. And she wrote back, says, well, I'm going to call her, and if she wants to talk to you, she'll call you. And I said, that's fine. So a couple days later, I get a phone call, and it's Kathy, his sister. But her last name was Pyle, not Muth. The reason it took me so many years to find her, she was married 7 different times. She had 7 different last names. So finally, I got a hold of her, and I think we both cried for an hour. She goes, Richard, nobody from the military ever sent us anything. They sent us his body, and that was it. There was no letter from his commanding officer. There was nothing from the Army whatsoever about how he died, when he died. Nothing. Absolutely. She goes, you're the very first person that ever contacted this family. Well, it ended up, Beacon Journal got a hold of it, and they did a big feature story on it about my getting a hold of her after so many years. But I still keep in touch with her all the time. So, let's see who else. A guy by the name of Ronnie Longshore. He lives in Sebring, Florida now. I keep in touch with him, but that's about it. Mm-hmm. However, I have gone to our reunions, and I've got a picture here, a group picture of all of us who crossed the Cambodian border that day, 40 years later.
That,
yeah.
I would like to scan.
Okay, I got so much for you to scan. You're not gonna probably kick me out of here.
Yeah. I think I have till like 4 o'clock today. So
okay, I'll tell you, let me say one thing here real quick. I just want to show you real quick. This guy, when we went into Cambodia, there's a chapter in there about my company, about when we invaded.
Into Cambodia?
Yes. Okay. He was actually with us, so everything I'm telling you is in these books. And this one here stopped me in my tracks one day. This book here, Outside the Wire. I was walking through the bookstore, and I just happened to look down. I was shocked at what I was looking at. I'm in this picture.
Here, let me.
I'm in that picture. You got to know who I am. I mean,
wow. Which one are you?
I'm in the back, right back there. I was there that day.
Right there. Huh.
So I flipped the book over and looked at the back cover. I know every one of them guys. That's my company.
Oh, wow.
And I remember the author, he joined our unit, I think in March of 1969 he came in, our unit, so.
Did you have news people with you at all?
Yes,
Okay.
not very often, every once in a while we get something. You had CBS, NBC, and ABC, that was it. And they would come out and ask, you know, how you're doing, you want to say anything to your mom and dad at home, you know, just a little chit chat like that, but not very often.
Did you ever do that? Did you ever go on record?
I don't think I did, to be honest with you. I don't think I did. The only time I really met any of the reporters was when they landed that night before we went across the river into Cambodia. They're the ones that actually told us that's Cambodia, you're going to invade tomorrow morning. Our commanders didn't say anything to us, our captain didn't say anything to us, our lieutenants didn't say anything, our sergeant didn't say anything till the very next morning. Well, we already knew we're going into Cambodia. The reporters told us. That's how we found out. So.
And did a reporter require a guard, or I mean, someone to no?
No, they're out there on their own. Just like your clergy I was telling you about. The reason that job was so dangerous is they were unarmed and they stuck out like a sore thumb. So there were jobs over there, cooks, another dangerous job, and I'll tell you why. Every so often, when weather permitting, they would fly in a hot meal. With the hot meal came a cook to serve you. Well, by the time everybody was served, it was getting dark. Well, he can't go back till the next morning. I remember one time we got hit about 3 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And all of a sudden we started hitting our flares, our hand flares went up and our mortar flares started going up, and you got small arms fired, and you know it's the enemy because they had green tracers. Our tracers were red. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
And what are the hand flares for? What is?
Illumination.
Okay.
It was like a parachute flare. It was in a tube. You took the top off and it had a little firing pin in the bottom. It went like that and it shot it up in the air.
And so we could see the enemy then?
Absolutely. And you look over and there's the cook. He's got an M16 in his hands firing back just like an infantry guy. So we gave them the name combat cooks. So, and they didn't get the recognition they deserved. They really didn't. That still upsets me to this day. I have a thing called, you know what that is?
Wings?
No, that's a combat infantryman's badge.
Oh, I see. Oh, a rifle?
That shows you that I've been in combat. I'm a combat veteran. In my opinion, just because that cook was a cook, he doesn't qualify for this, but he should, because he's out there fighting right alongside of us. But there was a lot of injustice like that in Vietnam. It really was. There was a lot of dangerous jobs, you know, even besides the infantry. Helicopter pilots, door gunners, clergy, combat engineers, truck drivers, MPs. It didn't matter whether it's Army, Air Force, it didn't matter. You had to patrol the perimeter and you had to go out in the villages and that. So there was a lot of dangerous jobs over there. There really were. It didn't matter whether you were infantry or not. So.
Okay, well, I'm probably pretty sure we're going to talk again or continue
Okay.
in another conversation.
Uh-huh.
I don't know, maybe after, are there any pictures you want to kind of quickly look at that you think might jog a memory that you want to
Well, let me
discuss?
see here real quick. Oh, I got so much stuff here. This is your MPC. This is our money that they gave us that you had to turn in your American dollars. Let me see here. What do I got?
How big of a backpack did you carry on the way home so you could carry all your
Let's see. Here's some pictures here. That's a picture of us crossing the river into Cambodia right there.
Now, did you get those from someone else?
Yeah, a friend of mine, Dave Coffey, sent them to me. This is a mountain they call Nguyen Bai Dinh. In Vietnamese, that translates to the Black Virgin Mountain. From the top, You could actually see into China from the top of that mountain.
Now, who are these guys here? Are these you? You're,
Yeah, those are friends that I knew over in Vietnam. I'd have to look at them. Oh, God, that's Squirrel. I know Squirrel.
Squirrel?
Yeah. Oh, he hated the Army, but I'll tell you what, he was one hell of a soldier, though. He hated the Army. That's Dave Coffey there by Texas. That's Think Snow. That was one of our tracks. Every track had a name to it. That's Doc. I know his name was Doc. He was one of our medics. But I'd have to look at the original letter to let you know, find out. Let's see here real quick. Some of the things you might want to. This is my certificate from jungle training. Whoops. This is my honorable discharge. That's a picture of me on top of a track.
Whoa.
This is a picture of me and my best friend, Brett Jones.
And were these your barracks?
That was in the rear at the time. We were
Oh,
back
okay.
there for stand down, I think, if I remember right. And in Vietnam, they weren't called barracks, they were called hooches. That's me receiving my first Purple Heart in front of the company formation. And here's a picture of me, my son, Vietnam veteran, myself, and my son, and some friends. We read the names of the 58,000 vet names on the wall, Vietnam wall.
Yeah, I'll have to scan those in so I get them better.
Yeah.
But I like having them in the picture so I know what they're about when I see them.
Okay. Yeah, I got a lot of stuff here you're gonna scan.
Now, you had mentioned that maybe the curators might be interested in something.
Yes, yes, I have something here. You might be interested, I don't know. Like I said, I'm a member, actually I'm the historian for the Military Order of the Purple Heart. And I had this made a long time ago. But if the museum would like to have it, it's an exact replica of what the very first Purple Heart looked like. That was the very first badge, military badge of merit from George Washington gave to his troops. If they want it, you know,
Yeah, we'll have to ask them.
yeah, and these here, the women back then would cut off the bottoms of their petticoats to make the ribbons for this very first badge of merit. So.
Is there anything else that you can think of? And
Let's see. This might interest you. It's a Zippo lighter from July, Vietnam, 66, 67. And what it says is, when I die, bury my face down so the whole world can kiss my ass.
and you got that there?
I've had that for so many years, I have no idea where I got it.
Did you smoke there?
No,
No.
it's too hot. Way too hot. See, I've got a helmet in there from Vietnam. I got a dummy Claymore mine. I don't know if you've ever seen one of these before.
So how do you hold that, or what do you?
Okay, this is what we used on ambush patrols. The back was filled with C4 explosives, okay? Embedded in the C4, there were 700 small ball bearings embedded. And what you would do, it says front towards the enemy. We would set these up by a trail. Anybody walking by, you would detonate it, and it would go out in an arc like that. And the devastation this does to a human body is unbelievable.
So it was like gunshot, like,
700 ball bearings going through your body.
and it was wired?
It was wired. It was detonated. Electric.
So
yeah.
you had to be there, how
You had to
far?
be,
Like,
yeah. Well, I don't know, from here to the door probably. And when they would walk in front of you, you had a little clicker, like, and it would send an electrical charge here and detonate.
So
That's-
you were still pretty close.
Oh,
You'd
yeah.
be laying on the trail or laying
Oh,
where-
yeah.
path that you knew.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. You had to be.
Yeah.
You had to be. So,
So you had to set it up, and then you were a witness to the devastation
Right.
that you called.
Right.
That had to be hard.
we would always, it was, we'd always set them up by a trail. We knew they would be walking, because the night was their time. They did everything at night. And they had a bad habit, though, of talking. So you could hear them coming. And once they got in front of you, bam. And the next morning you went out and saw how many you killed. And it was devastating to see what it did to them. It really was. I mean,
Did you ever let any go by?
no. That's not what you're there for. And like I said, we're not there for the American flag or mom or apple pie. We're there to take care of each other. Those guys want to kill us. We have to kill them first. That's just the way it is. There's no two ways about it. So that's
Yeah,
war.
I don't think people understand the different branches, the different job descriptions,
Mm-hmm.
and literally what that job is.
Exactly. Anybody that's called an 11 Bravo is light weapons infantry. In the Marine Corps, I think it's 0311 is infantry. Their experiences were no different than ours. You're in the infantry, you're in the infantry. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. You're a fighting man, that's it. That's all you are. That's what you were trained to do. That's what you're going to do. So,
Did you, besides as nurses, did you see any other women in the military?
yes, they had donut dollies. The good old donut dollies. You'd come in from an operation back to the base camp, or sometimes they came out to a fire support base. They were Red Cross girls. They always had Kool-Aid, donuts, or coffee. They were great. They were really great. They provided companionship. A woman, a round-eyed woman you could talk to is from the States, which you didn't see very often. So as far as any other women, it was just the nurses, the donut dollies. I'm sure they had clerks, probably in headquarters in Saigon and things like that, but no, you never saw them. You know, other than that, that was it. So it was very rare to see a round-eyed woman, very rare. And believe me, the nurses, like back at the base camp, the security was unbelievable. Yeah, you're not going to get anywhere near one of them. So
They're too important.
oh, they were. No, absolutely, absolutely, they really were. I mean, what they did over there, to me, just still boggles my mind how they could live with something like that. That the destruction and devastation of the human body every single day. Men crying, men dying right in their arms. Not men, these are boys. I mean, you know, that's why they draft you so young. You're stupid. You're innocent. You don't know. You think you're going to live forever until you find out you're not. So.
Okay, all right. Well, I think maybe we can go scan
Okay.
some of these. And so thank you. I just want to thank you here
Oh.
for the record for your service and
Oh,
for your
well, thank
and
you.
for volunteering to do an interview like this. I think these are important, and I'm kind of hoping to get back with you. Maybe you can come and speak again, or maybe we can arrange something.
Okay.
You can come back in.
Like I said, everybody's experience is different. Mine's totally different than somebody else that was here last week or somebody you're going to have next week. It takes everybody to fight a war, so. But I appreciate your asking me to be here. So.
Well, thanks for being persistent and not giving up.